We've now spoken about both destructuring of arrays and objects. In this section, we're going to take the difficulty up a notch and talk about one tremendously interesting area of destructuring that never quite seems to get enough attention in the JavaScript community. I want to, again, make an array of companies, but this time I'm going to make an array of objects instead. So let's say we've got an array of companies. And this time around, we're going to have a bunch of objects in here. So we'll have a name property of Google, and maybe it has a location of Mountain View, which is where they actually are located. We got Facebook, which is in Menlo Park. And then we've also got Uber, which is in downtown San Francisco. All right, so let's say for a minute that I want to get access to the location of Google. Like, what is Google's location here? So if we were writing ES5 code, we would have to do something like, var location is companies at 0 dot location. Definitely not the prettiest thing in the world. It works, right? We get Mountain View back, but it's not the prettiest thing in the world. By mixing destructuring, we can make this, or something that produces this location property right here, but in a little bit more, just a little bit nicer way. It looks a little bit nicer. Let's put the code on the screen, and then you can feel free to agree or disagree with me. So I'll say const location equals companies. And now I want to get access to the location property inside of the first object. Okay, that's the key here. So I'll reach into the first element that returns this entire object right here. So if I printed out location right now, it would give me the entire object, right? But I want just the location property off of that object. So I can also destructure at the same exact time and end up with just location of Mountain View. So this one is a little bit of a brain bender right here. This one's like not the easiest thing in the world. I have two sets of destructuring in here, and the thing to keep in mind is that it always goes from outside in. So we start at the outermost symbol, which is square braces. So but we're saying, okay, I want to reach into the array, give me the first element in the array. And that gets assigned to kind of this, you can imagine that in memory, we're now kind of assign it to this like braces, location braces. Once we have access to that object, the braces part of the destructuring then kicks in, and we actually pull off the location property. So we can mix and match object and array destructuring together as much as we can possibly imagine to access these deeply nested properties. Let's look at a different example of this, or maybe a different approach. So I'm going to clear off all the code that I have here. Let's say that we have an object for Google, and maybe it's a profile on their company. So we've got a locations property, and maybe it tells us about all the different locations that New York has. So maybe they're located in Mountain View, New York, and London, and I'm sure they've got offices in all those locations. So I want to say, I want to get access to Mountain View here by using destructuring. Okay, so this one's gonna be a little bit more challenging. So I want to use destructuring to get access to the first element inside of the locations property. So I'm going to say const, and we know that we're going to need Google. So the first thing that we know that we need to do is we need to pull off the locations property. To do so, we know that we can do just locations, and now boom, we got the array. Now here's the hard part now. This is the really challenging one, okay? The thought process here is that we are going to kind of provide what I personally refer to as like walking directions to destructuring. Okay, we're going to provide directions to the destructuring to figure out how to walk into this object and get at the first argument inside of it. Okay, so I'm going to say to the destructuring, I'm going to say, I want you to look into this object, like Google is an object, look into it, find the locations property. Once you find it, I want you to pull off the property called, or I want you to pull off the first element, which would be location. Now we can make reference to location and we get back Mountain View. So this right here is definitely a very challenging little bit of syntax to digest. Mixing destructuring of arrays and objects, pulling an object out of an array, which we saw just a moment ago, was definitely reasonable syntax. This is much more challenging right here. With this, we're saying, look at the locations property. It's going to return an array. So take that array and pull out the first element. It might be a little bit more legible if we do something like locations, locations. So now locations is an array, right? So here's my array, and we're just saying I want the first element out of this array. So maybe if I do it in 2 steps like that, it's a little bit more palatable. Okay, so again, this was definitely a little bit more complicated use of destructuring. I haven't really found a good use for this particular operation right here. It is much more common that we're pulling off individual properties or individual elements out of an array. So let's continue the next section and talk about some of the fantastic uses of destructuring in a very practical environment. So I'll catch you in the next section.